Well, hi there, everyone. I'm Dave Butler.
I'm Grace Freeman.
Welcome to Don't Miss This.
Scripture study class.
If you're new, we point out things in the different chapters we're in that we think you don't want to miss. Just our favorite parts, essentially.
Yeah.
That's really what it is.
And there's 100 million more, but
Yeah.
this is just
It just gets you going. This is like it's a warm-up. I was about to say that like it was going to be really cool. In my mind, there's like an analogy of like a warm-up that was much better than the word warm-up, and it just didn't come to me in enough time.
So now we're having a warm-up.
Yeah.
It's okay, you guys.
It gets
it's
the ball
okay.
rolling. It's not even good. I don't know. Anyways, just, you get it, right? You get it.
Here we go.
This is the appetizer. That's cooler.
Oh, that's
okay.
better. That's
right.
more exciting.
So we some egg rolls. We're about to have some egg rolls, some whatever, edamame, whatever you get for the warm-up. But point is, just point out some things that we think are really cool in the scriptures that are meaningful, insightful, things that are great to teach that I think create great lessons and discussions, and then hopefully that just gets you going and learning to love the scriptures even more. So, all right, Helaman. We're in the book of Helaman. We started last time. We'll give you a little, before, we have this little plug, baby, this little shout out because General Conference is coming. And if you saw last week, we showed you these two versions of the General Conference journal that you can get, right? They should just be called General Conference impressions is what they are, because they're really used to kind of keep the impressions, the promises, personal promises, I think more important than the ones that are going to get printed, because they're going to get printed, right? But just like the thoughts that you have of things that you want to do, things you want to think about, things you want to study. And then there's just different varieties. This one that's full of this beautiful art that's so good. This one is just a little bit more simple. It's just like graphic art. It can be younger or for the younger in spirit who don't write as much or whatever and who need to doodle during conference, okay? Because this one has doodle spots. And then we didn't show you this one last week, and then you're lucky because you would have died last week and not heard this lesson, because you can't even see this is the same artist we've had in the past. If you haven't and you have kids, or even if you don't have kids, this might be the one that you want for yourself.
It's me. I want this
full
one.
of activities and note spots. It's so awesome. So these are just great. They're designed so pretty. They just kind of elevate. They just elevate the weekend. They really elevate the weekend. So there's the plug for that. Get those at goodnewsbrandco.com, or I don't even know when this comes out, but if it's the week of Swiss days, it might be past Swiss days, because we're going to be there with these and other fun treats. So that's not even worth mentioning. Goodnewsbrandco.com before they sell out. There you go. Now we'll jump into Helaman. We're halfway through the book. So what we're going to kind of see here is a zoom in on this, speaking of conference, on this prophet, Nephi. And sort of like you get to see into the heart of a prophet here, which I think is really intriguing. And then you get to see also the heart of God with almost like his interactions. You know, isn't that neat that we don't really see much of like President Nelson's personal interactions with the Lord. We are confident they're happening. We have them. But I just like seeing this almost like there's something special about this, not only because he's the prophet, but for all of us as individuals, just that we see almost like the tug of war of life and God's involvement in that. And so that's what I think you can look forward to in these chapters. So 7 through 12. Last time we came off of and remember, we're just kind of in like this really strange part of history. And one thing that's strange about it, if you are, if you know the Book of Mormon, is all up until this point, you've sort of had like the Nephites, this group of people called the Nephites were the good guys, and the Lamanites were sort of the bad guys. And you had like this cool conversion during the war chapters, right, of the Nephites. But when you get to this spot in the Book of Mormon, there's like a reversal and there's a switch. And all of a sudden, the more part of the righteous people live among the Lamanites than they do the Nephites. And that's sort of the lay of the land. Another part of the lay of the land is just you don't want to be governor or chief judge because you're probably going to die within the month. Because there's just a lot of corruption, a lot of money, a lot of power. It sort of just reminds you of a made for Netflix movie, of a society just like crumbling from the inside with so much corruption. And listen, if you're a conspiracy person, you're probably thinking, that's our land, or whatever right now. And maybe so. I don't know. But at least it gives you this feeling. It gives you this idea of like, oh, the world's, it's like it's out of control.
Yeah.
It's out of control. And whether your particulars look like these particulars or not, all of us have experienced out of controlness. And so it's great to see what's the Lord do in situations that feel out of control.
Yeah. And in situations that almost feel backwards and are very different than what you're used to.
Yeah.
That's what I loved hearing. Like when I read that this time, that's what I thought was so cool, is that I love comfortable and safe situations. And this feels like, this is who God is in the moments that make you uncomfortable or are very different than what you're used to.
Yeah. Can I just point out this one? Because I don't think we did last time. Just a little sneak peek from last time, Helaman 6. I just love seeing this line, right? It talks about 35. The Spirit began to withdraw from the Nephites because of wickedness and hardness of hearts. But listen to this, almost like a little formula in 36. Thus we see the Lord began to pour out His Spirit upon the Lamanites. So for those interested in a pouring out of the Spirit, listen up. Because of their easiness and willingness to believe in His words. Like that seems so instructive to me. Just like because of their easiness and willingness to believe. I was so drawn to that before we jumped into 7. So, yeah. All right, chapter 7, here's a couple of things that I want to say. We have Nephi, who is sort of the spiritual leader. We might say he's a prophet, right, at the time, and sort of that head of the church during this one. He's Helaman's son. So Helaman, who led the 2,000 stripping warriors, who's also Alma the Younger's son. So this is Alma the Younger's grandson. I don't know why that's cool. But for some reason
it does
cool
feel like we should know that. It does.
In my mind. So Helaman 7, we kind of zoom in onto him, and you find that people have rejected all of his words. And the Gadian robbers are just filling the government, and things are just out of control. And he is it says 6, in the agony of his soul. And he pours out this prayer to God. And I think this is interesting because all of us have in our lives these moments, these garden tower, that's where he is, these garden tower prayers, where we pour out the agony that is in us. I think there's something, it makes me feel like you're getting the poison out of you a little bit. Get the hatred out of you, get the greed out of you, get the envy out of you, get the sadness out of you, and just lay it before the Lord. And it seems to be what he's doing. And he says, man, I wish I lived in 1 Nephi 1. That's where I wish I lived.
Which I think is the sweetest prayer to me, that he's like, oh, if I could have just lived then.
Right. Why? My life is so hard. And I think sometimes we think, oh, Lord, if I only could have so-and-so's life. Or if I could only have so-and-so's kids. Or if I could only have this and this calling, or these and these particulars. Like, I just feel like sometimes we all pour that out sometimes to the Lord.
And I think that's one of my favorite lessons, even just from that verse, is just thinking in my head, like, the most powerful prayers are the most honest prayers. Mm-hmm. And he could have prayed something very different in this moment. And it almost feels like stereotypically he should have. And he should have started with like, oh, I'm so grateful for this day, and say all the things that you're grateful for. And in this moment, he just really couldn't. Like his prayer really did need to start out and be like, listen, I just wish my life was different than the life that I'm living right now. Mm-hmm. And I think it's sometimes okay to realize that the best prayers are the most honest ones. And being vulnerable in prayer is, for me, as scary as being vulnerable with other people. But that's the type of prayer that God craves, is the most honest ones.
Yeah. And I just think it helps you get to where Nephi goes.
Yeah.
Because he eventually gets to this line in verse 9 to underline, these are my days. And that's a realization that's really powerful, I think. And because we could spin in this washing machine of, oh, I wish that this, and I wish that that, and this is unfair, and I wish, Yep. But eventually he gets to a spot, and that's okay that he's just like, God, I wish this wasn't my particular trial right now. But then he gets to this conclusion, which is, but these are my days. This is my life. These are the current circumstances. And so I will then pour these out to God. And that's what you see in verse 11, pouring out his soul unto God of the way things are. Because sometimes I think what adds to our frustration in life or our frustration with God is our wishing so much that they were different. But if we can get to that spot that says, but they're not, and these are my days, and then take that and place it before the Lord, I think then he's able to do wonderful ththings with it. You know, I think of that kid with the 5 fish and whatever, how many loaves and fishes, where he's just like, but this is insufficient. This is you know,
Yeah.
And it's like, but just hand what you have over, but this is what I have. And these are my days. This is my call right now. This is my season of life. And then pour and hand that over to the Lord. And I think we begin to see something beautiful. Now, and he's in the midst of this prayer on this garden tower, and people pass by and they hear him, and a crowd gathers to hear his prayer, which I think is a little bit rude. But they're listening to him pray, and they're all there, and he starts to kind of address it with them. He's like, "You want to know why I'm so upset? I'm upset because of y'all, because of the lives that the way our world looks." And then he kind of lays out this little decision for him. And I made this little chart because where he almost, and this could be a cool teaching opportunity or a cool study, where in verse 16 he says, "How could you have given way to the enticing of him who's seeking to hurl away your souls to everlasting misery and endless woe?" We have a choice of who we're going to hand our hearts and our lives over to. And he just sort of seems to lay out and then you can look at each of these verses. And remember, you can take a little screenshot or you can get the PDF and the app of this. And this could be a cool little study of where he points out, this is what it looks like to hand your heart over to the adversary. And this is what it looks like to hand your heart over to the Lord, right? Where he says, you could hearken in verse 18 to the voice of the good shepherd, right? Or have you forgotten he's the kind of God who delivers you? And so you almost have this difference between who is it that I'm going to hand my heart. And in fact, verse 25, last little thing I'll say for chapter 7, he says, "Woe be unto you because of this a great abomination, which has come unto you. You have united yourselves unto it, the secret band of Gadianton." And I just circled that word united. And it's just like, who have I united myself together with? Whose cause am I giving my heart and my energy to? Whose voice am I listening to for advice, for how to deal with this situation that I'm particularly in? And I just love that when you lay them out next to each other, it's kind of cool. It's just like, well, whose voice? If you look at it like this, just do what's those lists called? Like the pros and cons lists, where you're just like, that's what it feels like.
What are those called? It's the name is the
But
the description is the name. It's no problem. Continue.
Never mind. I was about to go and make fun of myself even more. But it's almost just like a really logical way of saying, okay, are you going to listen to him over here or him with a capital H over here? So anyways, those are things that I love about 7.
Chapter 8 is the continuation on, obviously, of this story. And what happens is all of these people, kind of start going against Nephi. And they see him and the prayer, and they have this experience with him. And then everyone gets super, super angry. And in verse number 1, they cry out, saying unto the people, all the chief people, the judges, say, "Why do you just not bring him forward so we can punish him? That's going to be the easiest. Just go get him and bring him here and we'll take care of the problem." And it's so funny because the more you read it, it's funny because the only reason they wanted them to do it and not them is because they were scared of him. So they were like, "Oh, you guys do it. That's your problem, not ours. We'll deal with it once you get him." And so the people go out, and I think verse number 6 is so interesting to me because all of the people are talking and they talk about we're so good and our city is huge and we have so much progress and we're doing so well. And then in verse number 6 they say, "And now we know that this is impossible for our city to be destroyed. for everything we've built up to be destroyed, like that would be impossible. We have nothing to be afraid of. And I think that verse number 6 gives you a little clue into the mindset of this people. And they were really limited by the word impossible. You can see it in verse number 6, and you're going to see it in the rest of the chapter. They lived in an impossible mindset. They thought that everything they had built up, it was impossible to be destroyed. But as the story continues, you're going to see that they didn't just think that, but they lived with limited beliefs. Their eye of faith was so small. Because what's going to happen is they're all kind of panicking. They're like, okay, like our cities are great. We have so much power. Like no enemy's going to beat us. And they were like, we can do this. Like we can get Nephi. Like we're strong. Like we're tough. And then they heard other people, which I highlighted in mine in verse number 7. For there were some who did cry out, leave this man alone, for he is a good man. Some saw what Nephi was doing in his prayer, in his heart. And they said, wait a minute, he is good. That is a good man. And then all of a sudden there's a little bit of contention because you have this group of people that were finally brave enough to like take him and like bind him up and bring him to the judges. And then this other group that said, wait a minute, we think he's good. And we think what he is talking about is good. We think he's on to something there.
Which it's like almost if you would just give yourself a minute. You know, like some of the people heard what Nephi was saying and it offended them quickly, or it was uncomfortable, or it meant that they were going to have to change, or it just, you know, and if they just give themselves a second to look at the situation and look at what he's doing, some of them came to the realization like, oh, he's a good man, actually.
Yeah.
Right? He doesn't have to do this. There's no benefit coming to him from it.
Yeah.
It's just like almost this analysis of who he is, what he said, and they're just coming to the conclusion to say, hold on.
What's going on with this?
Yeah.
What's going on with him? And so now there's a little bit of commotion and there's people fighting that he's good and people fighting that he's bad. And then all of a sudden Nephi sees the situation and he begins to speak to the crowd. And for me, when I read this, I was remembering the group of people that lived with that impossible mindset. And I wonder if Nephi had to have been thinking a little bit like that as well, because what he starts talking about are stories that God did impossible things. And he begins with Moses and the Red Sea and then the serpent on the stick, and everyone's looking at the serpent and everyone's like, he's going through these scenarios where God does things that are impossible. And then he continues, and after Moses, he goes to Abraham and he's like, did you forget about Abraham? Because his story is absolutely insane. And both of these two people preached about Jesus coming before that was even a possibility, like before that was even like way far in the future. And then he goes through, and in verse 19 and 20 you're going to see he goes through all of these. He says like, what about Zenos and Zenock and Jeremiah and Isaiah and all of these people that preached the same message that Jesus was going to come? How is that even possible that they all got on the same page? And at the end of verse 20, I think you kind of get the fight against an impossible mindset. And he says, oh, then, why not the Son of God come according to his prophecy? And the truth is, and the more I read this and the more I thought about it, is I was like, the Christian like core, that story is crazy. Mm-hmm. And the fact that all of these people thousands of years before Jesus even came, which also like Jesus, one man coming to save all of mankind, that sounds like an impossible story. And then to know all of these people that prophesied before he even came that he would come. And then you have Nephi that's standing there giving the same prophecy that Jesus is going to come, and all of these people live in the impossible mindset. And the story does seem impossible. If you take everything away and you just hear it, you are like, yeah, that is actually crazy. That seems impossible. And it is easy to let impossible shape your faith. And Nephi contradicts it with just 2 words. Why not? Why not just believe? It is just as easy to believe something is impossible as it is to believe that it is possible.
Yeah.
It's just as easy. So why not? Why not just give it a chance? Why not give it the opportunity to happen? And it's so interesting. And then he's going to go through and he keeps going and he talks about Lehi and Nephi and their backstory and all of these things. And I love verse 23. I just put a heart next to it in my scriptures because I think it's just so precious. And he says, and behold, he is God and he is with them. And he did manifest himself unto them, that they were redeemed by him, and they gave unto him glory because of that which is to come. And the truth is, the story does seem impossible until you know God. And once you know the God we believe in a God that makes the impossible possible. And we can experience that because he will be with us. He will show you that impossible things are made possible through him. That's why you can believe in all of the crazy things and all of the stuff that you're like, that doesn't even make any sense. There's no chance. You can believe because of him. You have a chance at believing because he will be with you and he will show you through glory and power and his presence. And in verse number 24, it goes through and it says, and now seeing ye know these things and you cannot deny them except if you lie. You know this is true. And if you're saying that it's not, you are lying to yourself. Therefore, you have sinned, you have rejected all those things. But this part is my favorite of the whole chapter. Notwithstanding so many evidences which you have received. And the truth is, the story's crazy. It just is. That the best the world has ever seen, the greatest man to ever live, came and he died so that we could be saved. He is so out of our league and he shouldn't even be thinking about people like us. But he did. And people prophesied that and believed that even before he came and thousands of years after. That is absolutely crazy, but I cannot deny that it is real. I have to say that it is true and real and the story is possible because it did happen because of the evidence that God has showed me in my life. And I just think it's so cool. And in my scriptures, I have a little scripture journal and I just wrote at the top my evidences. And I wrote a line underneath and then I just started going through and I was like, you know what? It's easy to believe in the impossible, but I don't want my faith to be limited on what I think is possible or impossible. I want to believe in a God that can do impossible things. And I just listed through all of the things that I have seen, the evidence to me of a God that can do the impossible. And some of them were silly, stupid things that no one else cares about, like heads up pennies and fireworks. And some of them were the moments that I was driving in my car and I just knew that God lived and he loved me. And everyone's list of evidence can be different. And I think that's the most powerful part, that just like verse 23 says, God will be with you. And he will give you evidence that the story is real, that Jesus died and lived and he is with us all of the time and all of it's real and we don't have to be limited by impossible with him.
That's so awesome. And I think I would do something like that, like in your own journal or together as a family. If you're going to do one thing on a Sunday or together in a class, just create a list of at the top, so many evidences. It's almost reminds you of Alma's sermon that he gave. These are the reasons that I believe. And you could give these examples to people from 23. Times when he's been with you. Times that he manifested himself to you. How about stories of redemption and second chances and change? How about times of his glory when you've been in awe of him? How about in 24, things in heaven, things on earth, things that are, times you've received a witness that things are true. The people of the past received so many evidences of a God of the impossible. And Nephi is here to teach them that same God lives today. And he's still a God of doing impossible things. He's still a God who will manifest himself in power and will be here. And then in this next chapter of chapter 9, he gives he's like, let me give you one right this very now.
Which is so exciting. Can you imagine if you were there? He's like, you think this is impossible? Wait.
He's like, God opened a sea. And God did this with the brazen serpent. And God did this with Jeremiah in jail. And God did this with Lehi and Nephi. And he's still a God of power. And he's given me power to tell you this right now, that your judge, your chief judge, has just been murdered. And how else could I know that? Except God is the God of impossible. So go check.
And just imagine the whispering. When he said that. People are like, who is
Yeah.
They're like, what?
So in chapter 9, there are these 5 people who said, behold, this is verse 2, chapter 9, verse 2. Now we'll know of a surety whether this guy is a prophet and whether God hath commanded him to prophesy. Because we have got a chance to experience an evidence or a witness. And I actually am so endeared to a God who wants us to experience his power and experience his presence and experience his miracles. He's like, I will not have you just believe the theology on paper. I want you to live it out and experience and have evidences of your own. Those will be what our faith is based in, why we choose to believe, are because of these so many evidences. We will have them in our life. And these 5 are like, okay, this will be a chance. Let's test it out, right? I love thinking about General Conference coming and having somebody stand at that pulpit and make a promise. Like I'm thinking in my mind, I just read recently that old quote from President Benson who says, as you begin to study the Book of Mormon, a power will flow into your life. I think that's great for someone to say, all right, now we'll know of a surety whether this is a prophet and God prophesied. I'm going to try it. I'm going to run. I'm going to go see for myself and I'm going to do it. And don't you love that?
So cool.
It's a God who says, go see for yourself. Or in the last General Conference, President Nelson said, those promises about the temple and attending the temple are some of the most remarkable things I feel like I've ever heard in my life. And it was something I can try. I can actually try it. I can increase my temple worship and see if those things do not come to pass. And I would say, write down as you listen to this upcoming, the prophets and apostles, what promises are being given, and try them out and see for yourself, like these 5, and expect marvelous things. Verse 2, that's the line I underline in verse 2. Such marvelous things, then we will believe, right? And God says, great, okay, good. I actually want you to do that. Right? I actually want you to live them out. And so they ran in their might and they went and they got to the chief judge and he really was dead. And they were so overwhelmed with the possibility of like, oh my gosh, Nephi really is a prophet. Holy moly. And it was so overwhelming they fainted, because this happens all over the Book of Mormon. And they fainted, all 5 of them. And at the same time, like someone had got, the judge is murdered, And so all these people come in and they see the 5 dead on the ground or fainted on the ground. And they're like, well, surely they did it. And God knocked them on the head for doing it. And now we've got them. And they throw them in prison. And a trial is set. And the trial's about to happen. And they're in the jail, and finally somebody puts together 2 and 2, like the trial's happening, and they're like, yeah, we got these 5 criminals. And then people who are at the tower, wait, remember those 5 who went running? Hold on, what are the odds?
No, that's the funniest verse.
5,
Please,
right?
that's the funniest verse, you guys. It's in verse 12. I literally wrote LOL next to it because it is so funny to me. Because this is literally what it says. And they said, they're like, hey, what happened to those 5 that were like the witnesses or whatever? And they answered and said, concerning this 5 who you're talking about you sent, we have no idea. But there are 5 who we do have in jail. And I'm like, you're kidding.
It's not like it's 1 and 1.
It's a joke. That's so funny.
So they're like, wait a second. So they go and get them out and they're like, tell us your story. And they lay it out and they say, this is what happened. And they tell that whole garden story. We ran and we came and we just knew. And then there's another accusation, right? And there will always be another accusation. There will always be someone saying something against your evidences. And that game will play out until the very end. Every experience that you have, someone's going to come in and say, well, it must have been because of this. Then you'll have another one and they'll say, well, it must be because of that. There will always be a counter argument to the evidences that you have. And eventually you just have to make the choice. What am I going to believe?
Yeah.
That there are a series of coincidences or there really is a God in heaven. And they say, then Nephi gives another, he says, okay, well then let me double down on this. Go to his brother who actually murdered him. Say to him, do you know that your brother got murdered? And he'll say, what? And pretend. And then you'll say, did you murder him? And he's going to go silent because he's going to be so shocked. And then you'll see blood on his cloak and you'll know for sure. And Nephi kind of lays out like a no other possibility sort of scenario. So they go, and that's exactly what happens. And then it says this in 37. They went and did, even as Nephi had said to them. And behold, the words which he had said were true. For according to the words he did deny, and according to the words he did confess. The brother confesses. And he was brought to prove that he himself was the murderer, and that the 5 were set free, and so was Nephi. And then 39 is the verse I love the most in this chapter. And there were some of the Nephites who believed on the words of Nephi. And there were some also who believed because of the testimony of the 5. And then this line, for they had been converted while they were in prison. And I just love a God who's sending witnesses of every kind to this world. And for all of us, there will be some of us who believe because of the words of the prophet that we hear in a couple weeks. But there will be some of us who believe because of the testimony of 5 who were converted in prison. And both of those witnesses become valuable parts of this story. And I added the cross-reference to Helaman chapter 7, verse 29 next to that verse. Because it says this at the very end. I know that these things are true because the Lord God has made them known unto me. And maybe he makes them known unto you through your own personal experiences. Maybe he makes them known unto you through the words of a prophet. Or maybe he makes them known unto you through the 5. And I would add that to my list, if I were making one, of so many evidences. And just say, list your 5. Who are the 5 people whose testimony, whose stories, whose witnesses, their personal stories and witnesses have confirmed your faith as well?
And I just love a God who makes a prison sacred ground.
I know.
Like, of course they added that line.
And takes those who were prisoners, who were doubters, right? And then their witness becomes one that converts so many. God takes, this is a theme of this book.
Yes.
God takes wicked kings, he takes naughty boys, he takes doubters, and they have an experience, and their witness then becomes powerful.
Chapter 10 begins, and you're hoping, like, after that crazy, miraculous experience that everything's going to be really good. And verse number 1 kind of shakes you into reality because there's another division among the people, and everyone's angry at everyone, and it's all a big disaster again. And isn't that just sometimes how life feels? Like, you're like, oh, wait, but did you just, like, we just had, like, we had something good going for us, and now, of course, it's falling apart. And I think the image that this...
And I think it's cool to read that in the book and to see that just like when that occurs in your life, don't take it as evidence that it wasn't real, that it wasn't a meaningful experience, that God's no longer involved. Just take it as evidence of this is just what life looks like sometimes.
And it paints the picture so clearly because it's going to describe Nephi leaving all alone. He's standing in the middle of all of the contention, all of the disaster, and he leaves all by himself. And he goes, and it came to pass that as Nephi went his way towards his own house, pondering upon the things which the Lord had shown unto him. And that, to me, just those 2 verses, paints the most clear picture of a boy that is just so worn down with disappointment and sadness and loneliness. And when I read it, like it almost just like was like a supercut in my mind of all of the times that I've felt that myself. And I think maybe it's just the image of him walking home by himself and walking away from everything that was falling apart and saying, well, like now, what do I do? Because I thought we had something good going and now it's still a disaster and everyone's angry at everyone and obviously what I'm doing is not enough.
And you're tempted in moments like that to just not care anymore. It's like, fine, then I just won't care. I just think of a mom who's just like, oh, I thought I had a breakthrough with my son. And then last night he did this. And it's like, oh my gosh, like, what do I do? Or a missionary who's like, oh, I thought that they were making such progress. And then, no. And then sometimes, I read this, I picture like President Nelson. Does he have moments like that where he's just like gets stories back and he's just like, oh, I thought we were making such good headway, with people. And it just, these are just moments that we just, my brother-in-law used to be church security. And it was when President Hinckley was president of the church. And so he was out there and he said he would see him and he would ride in like the little golf cart. with his head down, and his hands like on his head as he wrote. And he was just like, oh my gosh, like what is weighing him down? What is it that he must be carrying, And finally one day he just said it to another worker, another security guy who worked there for a long time. And he's just like, man, have you ever seen President Hinckley ride? He just always seems to have the weight of the world like on his shoulders. And then the guy was like, oh, no, he does that because he doesn't want his hair to get messed up in the wind with where he's going in particular. I was like,
That's not real.
but even though that is funny, the reality is...
You just said that whole story with like the most somber tone
well,
ever.
that's how he
and
was.
I was like...
Oh, because
It's just his hair, you guys.
it needs a little bit of lightheartedness in there. But the reality is, like, can you imagine, like, the weight of carrying, like, the spirituality of the world on your shoulders and just, and just being in charge of this. You see that with every spiritual leader, and that's the case of everybody who has someone that they're looking after spiritually.
And there is not a single person on this earth who is immune to disappointment in this life.
Right.
In fact, I think it's important. Like, I think it's an important emotion to feel. And the disappointment might come because of kids or for missionaries or whatever the reason that the disappointment might come.
Or grades, or not making the team, or I didn't get the job, or whatever.
But at some point in our lives, I feel like we all are going to have that same walk home. That it's just like, you're kidding me. I did my very best. I was trying so hard. I gave that everything I had, and I really thought it was going to work. And it just didn't. And I must not be good enough, and this might not be working out, and maybe he should have chosen someone different, God, because obviously it should not have been me.
Or could be a reason to think, like, God must have forgotten me. God must not love me. What have I done wrong is a question that comes up in times like that too, right?
Certainly. And I just imagine him with his like head down, shoulders slumped, not because of his hair, everyone, but because he was actually sad. And then God shows up on that walk home. And isn't that a good lesson about God anyways? That he showed up on the way out. Not once you already got home, but he said, no, wait, when you're still on your way, I will meet you in the middle of the disappointment. And he said, blessed art thou, Nephi. And I wonder if Nephi wanted to laugh. And he's like, for real? Like, do you see? Like, look around. Because I don't really feel blessed. Like, I just don't think that's, like, a true thing.
Yeah.
And then his words to him continues. And he goes through to say, I have seen what you are doing. Every moment that you gave 110% and everyone looked at you like you were just giving 15% of your effort and that it wasn't important and it was meaningless, I have seen that. You have done everything I've asked of you. You were not afraid of them. You didn't even care about your own life. All you cared about was doing what I asked for you. I've seen every single moment of your life, Nephi. Everything that you've given, everything that you have done. Which I think probably was more than Nephi could have ever dreamt of God saying in that moment. I cannot help but imagine that Nephi probably wanted to weep when he heard those words.
Mm-hmm.
That God saw his effort. I love that quote from President Nelson, and I want to think about it every day, that God loves effort. Because that means that even if it doesn't work out, God still loves it.
Yeah.
And that's evidence in verse number 4 of that. That God did not love the results. God loved the effort.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw it, every single ounce of effort, and he says, listen to me.
Well, and I just want everyone to see that in verse 4. It's the words, I have beheld. That's where you're getting that from. And just to box those words, just to hear that that's the voice, that's the message of God. I see you.
Yep. In everything that you've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, I will bless you forever. I will make you mighty in deed, in faith, in works. Everything that you could ever say or want to have happen will happen. And then in verse number 6 is the line of my whole life. I just love it. It's so simple. but the exact reminder that Nephi needed in the moment of disappointment. Behold, you are Nephi, and I am God. And the truth is in those moments of disappointment, isn't that all we really need? And isn't this God's message still to you? You are exactly who you are. I am not disappointed in that. I would not choose someone else. I know your name. I know what you have done. I've seen everything you have gone through in your entire life. And I am not confused. I didn't accidentally choose you. God knows exactly who you are, and he chose you specifically. And he is God. That is who he is. That is who he has always been forever. He said, we together are a really good team. And you don't need to forget and doubt that anymore. This is not an accident. You weren't from like the B team. Like I didn't just like have to accidentally, I was like, oh, last one in the line. I guess you're coming on my team. You're my first pick. This is a first pick kind of team. And then he goes through and he says, listen, anything you could dream up, I've got your back. I will stand next to you and I will make it happen. Whatever you can dream up and create, I will be with you in that. Anything, if you tell a mountain to go, it's going to go. Like we are in this together and I will have your back. And I think that my favorite part is in verse number 12. Because it's just so simple. But it just says that after the Lord had said this, he stopped. Nephi, not the Lord. He stopped. And he did not go unto his own house, but he did return again unto the multitudes. And isn't that so true about the God we believe in? That he will stop you in your tracks, and he will make sure to remind you that you are capable of what he has asked you to do, and he will get you exactly where you need to be. And to be honest, like, it still was a disaster. Like, the people still hardened their hearts, and it wasn't necessarily particularly better. In fact, it was probably still a lot of days filled with disappointment. But I bet Nephi went home, and he reminded himself of that day.
Yeah.
That I am Nephi, and he is God, and together we can do this. And you see that in verse number 16. Behold, the power of God was with them, and they could not take him to cast him into prison, for he was taken by the Spirit and conveyed away out of the midst of them. And it came to pass that he did go forth in the Spirit. And isn't that the best part of the story, is that he walked home alone, but he walked back with the Spirit. And that made all of the difference. That in the moments that we want to give up and we're so lonely and we're all by ourselves, don't worry. God's going to meet you on your way back, and he will not let you return by yourself.
That's so awesome. So he gives Nephi this blessing and this power that whatever he speaks is going to happen. And this people who are so hardened in their heart, he prays in chapter 11 and says, can there be a famine in the land? And this is such a sweet line, to stir them up in remembrance of the Lord their God. And then this, and perhaps they will repent and turn unto thee. I just love that Nephi is engaging in this ministry under the word perhaps. That perhaps someone might turn. That the Lord is going to do so much that just perhaps, it's worth just the perhaps, which is so beautiful. And then the famine does come, and it says this in verse 7, and they began to remember the Lord their God. And they began to remember the words of Nephi, and they began to plead with their chief judges that they wanted to change and to believe. And to me, that shows something about the heart of God that I love so much in chapter 11, is that once you begin to believe and begin to change, he's like, great, we've got it. And then Nephi prays and he says, can you take the famine away? Because they began to believe. And that's all he waits for. He doesn't wait for a complete transformation. He is waiting for people just to begin. And when they do begin, this line, verse 16, Nephi says, Lord, wilt thou turn away thine anger and try again? And I believe in a God who tries again and tries again and tries again and tries again and blesses us right when we begin to change and right when we begin to believe. I think that's like, isn't this a fun chapter where you see Nephi just like kind of like working together with the Lord to try and bring about this change in all of these people. And this is sort of a little side verse, but I just want to point it out because I love it. In 11, in verse 19, it says, "And behold, Lehi, his brother, who we haven't heard of for like all these chapters, was not a whit behind him as to things pertaining to righteousness." And verse 19 is a call out to everybody who just feels like they are overlooked. They're not in public or leadership positions or whatever. And I think verse 19 is a call out to anybody who feels like they're just trying in just the, I don't even know,
Yes.
like just the seminary classroom or whatever, or like on the stage in Sunday school, right? That's where I teach my class. Sometimes I feel like
Not the stage classroom.
the stage. I'm in the
It's the
freaking
worst
yeah. I'm on the stage, and I feel like it's a call out to people who just like are sometimes overlooked. And I just love that God does not overlook you. As much as he beheld everything that was going on in Nephi's life, he beheld everything that was going on in Lehi's life as well. And it talks about these two, and it says this line about them in verse 23, where it didn't matter how many people came and contended against them. They could always combat the arguments and combat the doubts, because it says that they were having many revelations daily. And I think there's something about this that's really important. And in fact, it's the word of our week, that word revelation. This experience, I like this communication of truth to people by God himself or by his agents. Revelation feels like a really fancy word. I would translate this word revelation. If you hang up this poster in your house, say to everybody, when you see this word, it's a word that means God came into your story. That's what that means. It's one of those great evidences. And in addition to being the word of the week, it's also this worksheet, which I think this is such a really neat exercise. It's a calendar, if you're just listening, that's just got a couple, like Monday through Sunday on here, as a chance to just write down the revelations that we're having. Write down the moments that God is coming into your life. The times that you feel like he was there, the times that he gave you an answer, the times that he gave you encouragement, the times that he gave you forgiveness, the direction that he's giving you, the nudges that you are feeling, and learn to be aware of them. I think we can train our hearts to recognize the revelations of God, but it requires us to do the training. Mm-hmm. And I love this worksheet gives everybody a chance for that. I just think sometimes, we'll be I'm in my 40s, and sometimes we'll talk and people will say like, well, I remember receiving this revelation when I was on my mission. And I love stories from missions, but I just want to say, but what about the ones that are happening on Wednesday of this very week? And I think we can get our hearts back into that mindset of, and if we're a mom or a dad, we can help our kids recognize revelations. Like maybe this week, everybody's talking about it every night when we have family scripture study, or just something, but we're just trying to teach our eyes to see and our hearts to feel God ever present in our life.
And it's okay if on Monday you need to be a little patient. Because sometimes it takes a second to get into the habit of not necessarily receiving revelation, but realizing revelation. And looking at your life and being like, oh wait, no, that was God showing up in my story. And on Monday night during Come Follow Me, it might take a second for you to break down what it really looks like for God's revelation to appear in your life. And you might need to have a little second where you unpack that and figure it out. And the goal is not necessarily that, like to me, when I saw this, the goal, right when I saw that it was a calendar, I thought, oh, I just hope that every single day I just get a little bit better at seeing it. And the thing I know about God is that he really will show up in our story, and it's just whether or not I'm conscious enough to realize that he's there.
Yeah. And I just think watching for it, that's why I like it. Watching for it helps you see it.
Hopefully by Sunday, you're not a little better
But then
at it.
copy it again and do it again. If it's helping you to see that more clearly. I just love this idea that sometimes this idea of many revelations daily belongs to like prophets and apostles. And I connect it with that 19, that Lehi was not one whit behind him as things pertaining to righteousness or opportunities. That this is something that is a privilege of God's children all across the world, that you can receive revelations daily. I was with a friend today who was just talking about a big decision that she's trying to make in her life. And I just was so thrilled and so happy to have a God who is willing to speak to her on a daily basis. Like, that's what I thought when she was telling the story. I was like, aren't we lucky? Aren't we we're so looked after that God in heaven is willing to give daily direction and daily encouragement. And if we find ourselves like the people at the beginning of the chapter, the second we begin to believe again, that privilege becomes ours. The second we begin to repent, when we try again, that privilege becomes ours as well. I like how this chapter ends in 26 in disaster, because it says in time. And when I read that the first time, I thought it said in no time because of the not many years after. That in not many years, in no time, this society goes into utter chaos. But I like to compare that to verse 17, where it just said, it didn't take many years either for them to change and try again. And that's interesting to know. I think it's true that our lives can turn into a mess really, really quickly. But I also know it's true that we can begin to believe and begin to change rather quickly as well, and begin to see those revelations, as soon as we want to see them again.
Yeah. The pattern kind of continues, and you see it. That it almost just feels like for the next chapter and a half, it's just they forget, they remember. They forget what they believe, they remember who God is. They forget who He is, they remember who He is. And it describes it with one word in verse number 1 of chapter 12. Just the unsteadiness of the hearts of men. And isn't that so true for me? If anyone has ever spent one day with me, they know that I fall into that category of unsteady, okay? I'm going to have some good moments and some bad moments, and that could be 5 minutes apart from each other. And then I love that it says, that's just how we are as people, is we are just super unsteady. There's going to be ups and there's going to be downs. But what we see in the Lord is His great infinite goodness, and that it will bless His people. That's consistent all the time. That is exactly who He is all the time. And it's interesting.
And I like that it's consistency, and also it doesn't run out too.
Yeah.
The word infinite also means it's not 3 strikes you're out.
Yes.
Like, there is an infinite number of opportunities, an infinite amount of goodness for every single one of us on the earth. Like, there's so much where that word infinite could go.
Yes, 100%. And you see it because it's interesting that it starts that chapter like that, because then it gets a little bit messy. And by verse number 3, you in your head when you read the beginning, you're like, I'm actually not sure that He really is a God of infinite goodness. And it's going to talk about many afflictions, and He's going to visit them with death and with terror and with famine and pestilence. And you're like, I think you got the wrong guy. I don't know why you're saying that is infinite goodness, until the very last line of verse 3. That they will not remember Him. And it is not that He was doing that because He is evil, or because He was so infuriated with their decisions. He was doing that because He is willing to do absolutely whatever it takes to help you know Him. And He said, wait, what if this will help? Should I just try? We believe in a God that will try anything to help us remember Him. And what's going to happen is it's still messy, and they're remembering and they're forgetting. And I've highlighted that in all through chapter 11 and chapter 12. I just highlighted the words forget and remember, just because it was intriguing to me that it happened over and over. And I think it's because I'm a really forgetful person. So it just is oh yeah, that's so true for me too. It's just going to be, there's days of forgetting and there's days of remembering. And then there's this little sermon in the middle of chapter 12. And all of a sudden, it's just this moment. They're like, wait, you're forgetting the thing you're forgetting is who you are and who God is. And it goes through and it seems a little mean because they're like, you are dirt. Like, you are just absolutely nothing. But do you know who he is? Do you remember the God that we believe in? Because he is really, really good, first of all. And in verse 6, I love this. You just want to highlight it, so I'll just tell you fast. And they will not that he should be their guide. That's a sad line, that they don't want him to be his guide. But I love that that's the role that God was playing in their lives, was the role of a guide. And I just think that's a cool name for him right there.
And I think kind of comes back to that list of like the him lowercase and uppercase one, where it's just like they would not that he would be their guide. And you're like, why? Maybe you forgot to read his resume.
Yeah.
And if you would read his resume, maybe you would want him to be your guide because he's about to give, his resume here.
Yeah.
Because, right, we all pick someone we look to. We all pick someone as someone who influences us, someone who guides us, someone who's, and it's just like, I would just want to ask those people, why would you not want him to be your guide? What
100%.
is it about God in heaven that you're uninterested in him being your guide?
100%.
Like, give a reason.
Yeah, and then he's going to go through and tell you who he is. And you're like,
right.
What? He's like, how do you not, by the power of his voice, he can break up mountains and hills will quake because of him. And by the power of his voice, the whole earth shakes and the foundations rock to the very center. And if he said unto the earth, move, it will move. That's verse 13. It starts in verse 9. All the power of his voice. And anything that he says will happen. He can make miracles happen left and right. He can do anything he wants. It's just the power of just only his voice. If he wants to raise mountains, he'll raise mountains. If he wants to hide treasure in the earth, he's going to hide treasure. If he wants to curse the treasure, he can curse the treasure. He can do whatever he wants. He is all powerful. And I was in the Sacred Grove a couple of weeks ago and I was so spoiled. And as I was just walking through the Sacred Grove, I was just having this moment that I was it was my forget moment, just so you know. And I was just walking and I was like, of course I'm in the most famous prayer that's ever been answered place of all time. And in my head I was just like, but God doesn't even answer my prayers. I was like, I just feel like he hasn't in a really long time. And I try to be good at praying, and maybe I'm not the best prayer in the whole entire world, but I just feel like God's not doing a lot of answering lately. And I was just kind of having that conversation in my head, and I was just thinking it. And then this is maybe not great, but it's fine, everyone. I saw this field of clovers. And I was like, okay. I was like, I'm going to pray for a 4-leaf clover. That's so easy. That is so simple. And so I just prayed. I was like, please let me find a 4-leaf clover. And I sat on that ground. Just so you know, everyone else I was with was having spiritual experiences in the Sacred Grove. And I was on the outside of the Sacred Grove in a field looking for clovers for seriously 45 minutes. I did not move. Okay, I just was searching for a 4-leaf clover and I just did not find a single one. And finally I was like, I knew it. I was like, even in the place where God loves to answer prayers, the Sacred Grove is the name of it. Of course, I didn't find a 4-leaf clover. And everyone else, just so you know, everyone else was finding them, okay? And that made me feel worse. Because, the 8-year-old boy was like, I got one. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm never finding one. My prayers are broken. And I would just, gave up. And I was like, it's fine. I was like, I don't even care anyways. It was just a fake prayer. I didn't even really want that. It's fine. It's not a problem. And then I was walking away and a missionary ran up and they were like, hey. And I was like, hey. And she was like, look what I just found for you. And she just pulls out the most beautiful 4-leaf clover that I had ever seen in my life. And I legit screamed. I was like, what? And I was like, how did you know? She was like, what? And I was like, no, I've been looking for a 4-leaf clover for the past 45 minutes. You didn't understand. And she was like, oh, she's like, honestly, I just found this one. And I was like, and I just said, I was just going to give it to the first person that I walked by. And she was like, so you can have it. And I remember thinking she does not even know what that just meant to me. She has no idea. And I pressed it in my scriptures. And I remember walking away and just thinking, God needed to remind me that there was no chance that I was ever going to find a 4-leaf clover. That's not how I work as, Grace, the human, just is not a good finder. I don't have really great eyes. I get super distracted. There was no chance that I was going to be able to find a 4-leaf clover. But undoubtedly, God could do it in 3 seconds. That was not even hard for him. It wasn't even a stretch. And I just think that maybe that's what we need to remember in chapter 12 and what they forgot. Because it almost seems like when it's describing God, you're like, oh, he's like kind of big. And like that's a lot. And he can do a lot of things. And maybe it feels overwhelming or a little bit like intimidating. But I think that's the best part of God, is that he is really big, but he is not too big for us. Mm-hmm. And he can move mountains and crumble mountains and bury treasure and do anything that he says he will do. But he can also find four-leaf clovers when I can't. And he knows when I need one.
Yeah. And it seems like he's got this big resume about mountains and foundations of the rock and moving things and the waters of the deep. He could dry up oceans. Almost to say, but with that power, he said, verse 24, and may God grant in his gratefulness that men and women might be brought unto repentance and good words, that they might be restored unto grace for grace according to their works. That he's like, but people are at his center and saving them and restoring their faith in him and restoring their relationships are everything that he's wanting to. He is this great God of power, and he uses that power that all men might be saved and might come unto him and live in relationship with him. And I think that is really powerful. Mm-hmm. All right, hope you have a great rest of the week, and we will see you next week for Samuel the Lamanite.
We can't wait.
I know. Jump on your roof, everyone.